Dear God's family, thank you for tuning into the Revived Winner channel, and thank you for joining the Revived Winner herself on yet another video, on yet another week with a message from God. And today's topic is going to be the journey out of captivity, the journey out of bondage. And remember, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's definitely about God. So welcome to today's video. Let's get into it. And our lead today is going to come from Exodus chapter 5 verse 1 to 6. And today we're going to touch on, let me just preempt, we're going to talk about Moses and Pharaoh, or Pharaoh if you like. And we're going to talk about how the Israelites got out of captivity, what it took the Israelites to get out of captivity. That is our topic today. And let us read it. It says, "Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert.' Pharaoh said, 'Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go.'" Let us first pause there. And Pharaoh did not recognize any other gods. Remember, this was Egypt, and Egypt had so many gods. It had a culture of these gods of seasons, of these gods of different things. And so Pharaoh only knew about these gods. When Moses came and told him, "The God of Israel has said that you release his people so that they may go and worship him and sacrifice to him," Pharaoh asked him, "Who is this God that I should obey?" Because these gods of Egypt were visible, but this God Moses was talking about was not visible. And so Pharaoh could not understand, who is this God that should compel me to obey? And that is where the war began, when Pharaoh did not recognize the God of Israel. And in verse 3 it says, "Then they said, 'The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword.' But the king of Egypt said, 'Moses and Aaron, why are you taking people away from their labor? Get back to your work.'" If you look at verse 4, Pharaoh in fact looks at Moses and Aaron and sees that these people don't want the people of Israel, who are slaves in Egypt, to work anymore. And this is why he was telling Aaron and Moses, "You get back to work." In verse 5 it says, "Then Pharaoh said, 'Look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working.'" And so in verse 6 now, we see, "That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and foremen in charge of the people." In verse 7 it says, "You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before." So when you look at verse 7, Pharaoh in fact got mad. And he decided, you know what, you don't want to work. You want to take a 3-day journey and go to the desert and worship your God. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to increase your labor. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to make it harder for you. What I'm going to do is that now oppression is more. So he became brutal and said, in fact, don't even give them material. I want the same amount that they have been producing to remain. And so he gave directives to these foremen who are supervising the Israelites, for them not to leave. That brings our first point. Life will get hard at first. The moment you declare to the enemy that you're leaving, the moment you declare to sin that you're leaving, life begins to get hard. As we see for the Israelites, life became brutal. The oppression was taken a notch higher because they had declared that now they want to leave. And remember, this was after 400 years of slavery. So at some point after the Egyptians now became brutal, they began beating them, they began oppressing them, the work multiplied, everything increased, but they were not being supplied with what they were being given before. The favors were taken from them. And in verse 22 in chapter 5, we see, "Moses returned to the Lord and said, 'O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon these people? Is this why you sent me? In verse 23 it says, "Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble upon these people, and you have not rescued your people at all." And so even Moses at this point began seeing the repercussions of him going to Pharaoh to rescue these people in terms of, we are going to worship. And it's the same thing today. The moment you decide to get out of sin, the moment you decide to free yourself from the Pharaoh, you began facing oppression, you began facing trouble, you began facing withdrawal from family, from friends, even contracts are withdrawn, even in your business. You began seeing this. Why? Because you have taken a step into the journey out of captivity, into the journey out of bondage. And you should not be surprised. This has to happen. God has to demolish your establishments, or the establishments that you have been living in before he puts or creates his own establishments in your life. And so even if Moses went to God and complained, God was still persistent. Stick to God's will, purpose, and plan. Make sure you stick to his will, purpose, and plan, because the moment you start a journey with him, you have to make sure that you stick. This brings us to chapter 6 of Exodus. And chapter 6 from verse 6. God now spoke to Moses. After Moses went complaining, God also spoke to him. "Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians." Praise be to God. And so at this point, God was reassuring them. We are together in this plan. We are together because I have a purpose. We are together because I have a will. And so that is why you should be patient at this time where it seems like God is not there. At the time that you think this is the right time for God to rescue you, that's the time you should be praying for patience. That's the time you should be praying for joy from God, the joy of salvation. That is the time you should be praying for wisdom to maneuver that situation. Remember, that's the time to stick to God's plan, purpose, and will, because he's already said it. He's already said he's rescuing you. He's already said he's getting you out of captivity. What you have to do at this point is be patient and stick to it. Because remember, when God sets to do something, he is always faithful. He is faithful and he himself sticks to it. It's us humans who wait upon the Lord and become impatient and leave. But remember, God doesn't leave. God remains faithful. And so even after God said this to Moses, Moses was still stubborn. Moses was still asking him, how will Pharaoh listen to me if the Israelites themselves cannot believe me? If they themselves, they cannot listen to me. How will Pharaoh listen to me? Maybe because I'm stammering. That's why these people cannot listen to me. And God considered that, and God was faithful to Moses as well. And he said, if you think it's because you're stammering, then let Aaron be your spokesperson. Let Aaron be your prophet. And it is at this point that Aaron was officially ordained and put together with Moses to speak for him, because he gave a reason, thinking that God will tell him to withdraw. God gave him another solution and said, I've given you a spokesperson. So for Moses not to give up, for him not to doubt God, God let him in on a secret. And he told him in chapter 7, from verse 1, let's read. "Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And though I multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you." So this was a secret that God let Moses in on. And he will still be hard-headed. He will still have a hard heart. And so he will not listen to you. "Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it." And so they knew it was going to be a journey. They knew we are just about to face a lot of opposition. And God was faithful enough to let them know it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be an easy ride. He will refuse. Even though I increase my miraculous signs, he will still resist. And we get to chapter, and this is when now the plagues began, because Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God. Even God today can harden your Pharaoh just to see how pushy you can be, just to see how determined you are to get out of captivity. Being born again is the first step to getting out of captivity, to getting out of bondage. You cannot get out of captivity if you're still in the world. You see, God is a God of free will. He gives you the choice. He gives you a chance to make a choice. You make a choice between the kingdom of God, or you can choose the kingdom of darkness. But if you still hold on to the kingdom of darkness, God is not going to force himself into your life. This is why he's a God of free will. And that is why he says, the way to myself, the way to God, the way to God is Jesus. And so the way to being released out of captivity, out of bondage, out of that suffering, out of that pain you're in, is receiving Christ. That is the only way to God. It is the only way to freedom. Receiving Christ is number one, so that God can call you his people, so that God can say that you are my son and you are my daughter, and I will get you out of captivity. It is a covenant, and you have to fulfill your side of the covenant. And we go to the second plague, which is the plague of frogs. And this is when Pharaoh started seeing that, you know what, maybe there's something going on here. Because at first, when even Aaron went to with the rod, with the staff, and it turned into a snake. He also called the magicians. He also called the sorcerers to turn theirs into serpents. And guess what? This stuff that Aaron was with swallowed all these other serpents, just to show them that the God we worship is the true God. He is the power above all powers. Remember, at all times, when you're facing trouble, when you're facing war, remember the God you worship, the God of Israel, the creator of heaven and earth, is the power above all powers. So do not fear. They might turn their staffs into serpents. They might look like they're worshiping a God that is going to defeat your God. Remember, your God is the God above all powers. In Exodus chapter 8, verse 8. Now this one takes us to the third point, which is that captivity will begin to break. Those chains will begin to break. This yoke will begin to break. Remember, your Pharaoh will begin to break at this point. And in chapter 8, verse 8, when now they had the plague of frogs, the frogs that filled all over. You can imagine a land full of frogs croaking, frogs hopping here and there. You can imagine that sort of land. And in verse 8, chapter 8, it says, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. At this point, Pharaoh thought, let me just call these people, and so they can tell their God, this God they call the God of Israel. Let me call them so that they can pray to him and tell him to take away these frogs. Your Pharaoh will begin to break, and your Pharaoh will begin to see that this is the true God you're worshiping, that this is the God that lives, this is the God that is not an idol. And so when he told them that, Moses was in agreement, and he told him, you must make sure after these frogs go, you leave us and let us go to worship. So remember, when your Pharaoh begins to break, when your Pharaoh begins to admit to defeat, when your Pharaoh begins to melt, that is the time you become hard. That is the time you become stronger. That is the time you pray for more strength. Because at that moment he begins, your Pharaoh or that sin or that captivity and that bondage begins to give in to your God, to the true God. You should be very strong so that you are not swallowed into this deception, because this is deception. That Pharaoh can begin showing you that, so that you can also put your guard down, so that you can also become nicer to them, so that you can lose your plan, so that you can lose the purpose that you're called to serve. It's the time to ask for more weaponry from God. It's the time to go on your knees so that you can win this. In verse 12, it says, after Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, and in the fields. So it was fulfilled. But remember, Pharaoh saw that there was relief. He hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. So they were not surprised. And so they continued. They stuck to the plan. They stuck to the will and the purpose of God upon their lives and upon the lives of the Israelites. And so this one takes us to the other chapter, that is in chapter 8, verse 25. Now, the other point is, do not negotiate with sin. Do not negotiate with your Pharaoh. Do not negotiate with captivity. You do yourself no good by negotiating. Exodus chapter 8, verse 25, and it says, Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Go sacrifice to your God here in the land. But Moses said, That would not be right. Remember, Pharaoh at this point has started negotiating. He has started saying, instead of going to the desert, sacrifice to your God here on the land. Sacrifice to your God within Egypt. And Moses was adamant. Moses was determined to get these people out of captivity. And so he said, that would not be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. And so as you're getting out of captivity, as you're getting out of bondage, remember to pray for wisdom so that you may face the situation with a lot of wisdom. Moses was wise, and he told him, we are not going to worship here. We are not going to sacrifice here. He did not say because you worship idols. What he told Pharaoh was, because we are going to offend the gods of the Egyptians. Remember to always be wise so that God can take you out of captivity, out of bondage successfully. Don't go shouting and saying, I know the true God. You don't know. God asks us to be wise in this journey. So be wise as Moses was. In verse 26, it still says, and if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? We must take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God as he commands. So when the enemy begins negotiating with you, don't sit with the enemy at the table and say, because I have God in me, because I have God with me, now I can negotiate with the enemy. Do not negotiate with the enemy. Do not negotiate with sin. Do not start saying, since he has accepted, at least he has accepted. You know the problem today, and this is why the kingdom of God is having trouble even having followers, is that people that are calling themselves Christians today, people who are not Christians truly. You can watch the last video. I've talked about the true Christian, the true way. Are you a Christian by deed? Are you a Christian just by title? So people have negotiated with sin. And so they say, you can even hear people saying, you see, since I got saved, nowadays I only take a bottle of wine. Wine is allowed in the Bible. Stop lying to people. Stop negotiating with sin. You see, since I got saved, now I no longer have clandestines that are 3 of them. Now I only have one clandestine. Now I only have this and that. Since I got saved, I do not go to the traditionalist. I do not go to this spiritist. I go to this person who foresees my future. Stop negotiating with sin. If you have chosen the ways of the Lord, you should stick to the ways of the Lord. Negotiating with sin is as good as being a whole sinner. It's better you sin wholly than to negotiate with it and think that you're still walking with God. And don't say that God will understand. No, this is not the kind of understanding God talked about. God will not understand you negotiating with sin. In fact, you will be offending him. If Moses negotiated with Pharaoh, the Israelites would never have gotten out of captivity. They would never have gotten out of bondage. So remember, at each and every time that you're convincing yourself, that you're trying to comfort yourself with sin, remember, negotiating with sin is just going against God. We can see Pharaoh continuing to negotiate with Moses. In chapter 9, verse 27, he says, Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. This time I have sinned. He said to them, "The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." The enemy will start looking like he has given up. The enemy will start looking like he has withdrawn. You see, those people who used to withdraw will start telling you, "You know what? We understand you're saved. We understand you have chosen the path to salvation. We understand you no longer want to be associated with this sin. But just come. We will consider you. We will consider you in everything that we do." And so Pharaoh continues and he says, "Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder." This was after the plague of the hail. And he said, "Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let go. You do not have to stay any longer." In fact, there's a point where Pharaoh, where that sin, where that captivity seems to have let go of you. But remember, we talked about deception. The devil is an expert at deception. Moses replied, "When I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord." You remember, even after that, he did not let them out. And so we got into the plague of the locust. Then Moses and Aaron were back to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, "Go worship the Lord your God." "But just who will be going?" He asked them. "Who did you say you will be going with?" And Moses was quick to answer. And he said, "We will go with our young and old, with our sons and daughters, with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Remember Moses, he stuck to the plan. God had said, each and every Israelite, your flock and your herd, each and every cattle, everything that belongs to you, you will go out with. And that was the agreement God had put on the table. And Moses had to follow to that. And Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you, if I let you go along with your children, if I let you go along with your women and children. Clearly, you are bent on evil." He knew, if you live with your women, if you live with your children, you're not going to return. You're not going to come back to continue working for me. But what he did not realize is that the years of captivity were over for these Israelites. He says in verse 11, "No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you have been asking for." He knew if the men left, they will definitely return for the women and for the children. Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. And in chapter 10, verse 24, we continue to see the negotiating going on. Then this was now the plague of darkness. It was totally dark. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind." You can see another level of negotiating. Now he's telling them, go with your women, go with your children, go even with your men, but leave the flocks and the herds behind. Because he knew if the flocks and the herds were left behind, they will definitely return for this wealth. They will definitely return for their herds. Then we can see Moses saying, "You must allow us to have sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God." Again, I say wisdom. And this is when Moses told them, if you tell us not to go with our herds, if you tell us not to go with our flocks, remember, we will not have sacrifices. And our God requires burnt offerings. And so Pharaoh knew that he had no way out. So it is at this point that they disagreed. And in fact, Pharaoh told Moses, "I never want to see you again." And Moses says, "Just as you have said, you will never see me again." And this is when the plague of the firstborns came. This is when the victory of God was revealed. And this takes us to our last point, which is God wins. God eventually wins. His victory prevails. After the struggle of getting out of captivity, after the struggle of getting out of bondage, God eventually wins. Remember, you're not dealing with a God that even has a record of being defeated. Remember, the God, the creator of heaven and earth, is never defeated. Even when it seems like the enemy is winning, even when it seems like the enemy is going to get the victory, our God is not defeated. The God that created us is not defeated. This now is when the Passover came to happen. This is when now the Israelites had to go, because the firstborns of all Egyptians, the firstborns were all taken away. The firstborns were killed. In chapter 12, verse 31, after these firstborns were killed in every house, Pharaoh now sent the officials of Egypt and told them, can you go and confirm that this has not happened in Goshen? Goshen was where the Israelites used to live. They used to live separately because remember they were slaves. And God would make all these plagues happen at one part where the Egyptians had occupied. And in the part where the Israelites had occupied, these things would not happen. And so the firstborns of the Israelites did not die, but the firstborns of the Egyptians died. And in verse 31 it says, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. Remember, the Bible says, in the land of Goshen, where they used to live, not even a dog barked. It was so peaceful. As in the land where Egyptians lived, where they were occupying, there were screams, there were cries, because there was death in each and every household. You can imagine a village that you live in, each and every household having deaths, each and every household losing the firstborn. And so at this point, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go and also bless me. He had recognized that this God was the true God, and he even asked Moses, bless me as you go. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country. They even urged them to hurry and leave, because at this point they could not stand all these plagues. And they said, if you continue staying here, we will all die. We will all lose our lives. So it's better that you just leave and go. And this, remember, was the point where they were released from captivity. And we can see that God eventually wins. So if you're in captivity, if you're in bondage, it is not easy to get out of it. If you honor your side of the covenant, God honors his side of the covenant. God is faithful. He will not let you die in suffering. He will not let you die in captivity. Remember, what happens is that in the middle of this captivity, in the middle of all this suffering, you give up and you leave you leave the cause of getting out of captivity. You will never get out of captivity. This is now where you find frustrated Christians that have left the journey that they already began. And remember, when you leave the journey, the devil does not let you go. In fact, he's angry at you for even trying to be against him. It's like putting on the attires of war and taking on the weaponry that you need and going to war, and then realizing, you know what, let me just go back home and I will come later to fight. If you leave the battlefield, what will the enemy do? He will definitely finish you. So today, if you have set on a journey out of captivity, if you have set on a journey out of bondage, remember you have to stick to the cause. Remember you have to stick to God's plan. Remember you have to be a person who perseveres. You have to have patience. You have to be the person who pushes for this release. Because when you push, God will see your effort. God will definitely not let you down. God will be faithful. And so today, release yourself from captivity. Stop saying, I cannot let this go. You know what, I'll just reduce on it. Don't negotiate. Don't negotiate with sin. That is the beginning of your downfall, the moment you negotiate with sin. So today, release yourself from captivity and the Lord will do the rest. Thank you for watching today's video. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the feedback as well. And thank you also for the suggestions you have been giving me. Praise be to the living God. Accept Jesus. He's the only way out of your captivity. He's the only way out of your bondage. He's the only way to salvation and to freedom. And let me tell you, this other side of the journey, when God finally releases you from that captivity, it is a wonderful life. You will not regret it. You will not regret taking the step out of captivity. So thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe, remember to like, and remember to share. But most importantly, remember to put this word into action. Thank you.